Vale adjusted his recording prisms. The bridge of the Void Render felt sterile. It was dominated entirely by the rhythmic, grating hum of a failing atmospheric scrubber near the starboard bulkheads. It ticked like a mechanical heart, a stark contrast to the flawless optical feed broadcasting from the Zenith Spire. The entire coalition was watching this telemetry. The historic Union. Commander Lyra Xerxes stood absolutely rigid beside the primary holotable. Her secondary chromatophores remained a muted, neutral gray, a marriage forged in a boardroom, designed strictly to consolidate military assets against the encroaching shadow blight. Vale was assigned to document a symbolic merging of species. Instead, he documented geometry. Cold, precise, utterly detached. I'll be honest with you. What I entered into the official archives that day forced Coalition Command to entirely rewrite their definition of tactical probability. The Scarlet Rift bled neon gas against the canopy. Kalen Vance wrenched his flight yoke hard port. G-force slammed him against his harness. Beneath his flight suit, the stiff, ceremonial high collar of his Azurian dress uniform bit deeply into his human collarbone. A constant, chafing reminder of his boardroom-bound duty. He ignored the warm trickle of blood on his neck. Proximity alarms shrieked. Crimson warning holograms bathed his cramped cockpit in a chaotic strobe. Plasma fire scorched the void inches from his port engine. They were completely surrounded. Vale watched the tactical projection shift. The glowing blue dots of the Coalition patrol were suddenly enveloped by a swarm of jagged red markers. The Shadow Blight. It wasn't a skirmish. It was an execution. Commander Xerxes did not flinch. She observed the ambush in the Scarlet Rift with mathematical calm. The Azurian doctrine was clear on the matter of acceptable losses. The patrol was already statistically dead. Vale focused his lens on the readout for fighter designation Echo 7. Kalen Vance, the new husband, the human asset. Vale expected the human's biometric telemetry to spike with panic. Instead, the readout held steady, eerily steady, which meant the tactical algorithms were entirely wrong about him. The human wasn't panicking. He was calculating. Kalen snapped his thrusters into reverse. The maneuver violently rattled his teeth. A Shadow Blight interceptor overshot his canopy. Kalen squeezed the trigger. High-yield plasma shredded the alien craft into localized debris. 1 down, 11 remaining. The comms channel crackled with static and screams. Jackson Reed's voice cut through the noise. His engine block was ruptured. Jackson was venting atmosphere, spinning out of control deeper into the rift's gravitational eddies. Standard protocol demanded an immediate tactical retreat. You do not trade 2 lives for a dead ship. The math was simple. Kalen killed his comms feed. He rerouted auxiliary power to his forward deflectors. He was not a mathematician. Order the retreat, Xerxes commanded. Her voice was flat, empty of inflection. Vale recorded the directive. It was the only logical choice. The remaining fighters were ordered to abandon the crippled vessels and jump back to the safety of the Void Render. Vale watched the blue dots on the holotable comply. They began to scatter. All except one. Echo 7 broke formation. It banked hard, driving directly back into the densest cluster of red markers. Whispers erupted among the bridge crew. Xerxes leaned closer to the projection. Her chromatophores flashed a sudden, sharp violet. Confusion. The human was defying a direct order. He was flying a suicide trajectory. Vale zoomed in on Kalen's biometrics. The heart rate was escalating now, pushing past recommended limits, flooding with adrenaline. He was acting on impulse, a dangerous, chaotic variable in an otherwise ordered equation. Heat alarms wailed as Kalen punched through a wall of plasma fire. The hull groaned under the kinetic stress. He locked his targeting computer onto Jackson's spinning fighter. The Shadow Blight swarm collapsed inward, drawn to the lone, irrational target. Kalen slammed his palm against the auxiliary release console. The undercarriage shuddered. He fired the emergency tow cable. A thick, magnetic tether shot across the void. It clamped brutally onto the reinforced strut of Jackson's dying ship. The kinetic shockwave nearly tore Kalen's control yoke from his hands. He gritted his teeth against the sheer physical torque. He was dragging dead weight through a gauntlet of enemy fire. His port engine coughed and began to trail black smoke. The math said they were dead. Or maybe he just didn't care that the math said they were all dead anyway. The rhythmic, grating hum of the failing atmospheric scrubber ticked louder in the suffocating silence of the bridge. Vale's stylus hovered over his datapad, the recorded data suddenly feeling entirely meaningless. The holotable flared with a blinding, terrifying crimson. 3 shadow blight dreadnoughts tore out of hyperspace, their massive, jagged silhouettes dwarfing the Coalition fleet like leviathans rising from a black ocean. Their primary weapon batteries charged, glowing with sickly, irradiated green energy that distorted the local gravity field. Their target was unmistakable. They were locking onto the Void Render. Vale watched the commander's hands, noticing for the very first time how her long fingers gripped the metallic edge of the holotable with enough desperate force to turn her knuckles a translucent, bruised purple, while the tactical display painted her entire face in the crimson light of their impending annihilation. She was watching her own execution. On the bridge's tactical feed, the Scarlet Rift became a graveyard. Vale watched Echo 7 successfully accelerate Jackson's crippled ship out of the primary kill zone, but the swarm had already moved on to easier prey. A proximity alert flashed on the main board. Vale helplessly watched the icon for Elias Young's fighter get caught in a brutal crossfire. The young protege's shields collapsed instantly. The digital marker vanished in a silent, blinding flash. Gone. The telemetry on Vale's screen documented the exact millisecond the human asset shattered. Kalen's biometrics didn't just spike, they mutated. The chemical markers for human grief and rage collided, sparking a neurological chain reaction that the Coalition medical databases couldn't even quantify. The dreadnoughts fired their first ranging shots at the flagship. The Void Render shook violently, throwing Vale against the bulkhead and shattering his datapad. Shields dropped to 40% in a single impact. Another volley would crack the hull wide open. Xerxes closed her eyes, silently accepting the inescapable math of the situation. It was over, which meant the marriage was going to end before it ever truly began. Echo 7 did not retreat with the surviving fleet. While the remaining Coalition ships engaged their warp drives to escape, the tracking sensors showed Kalen Vance routing all remaining life support energy into his primary thrusters. He was a single, battered fighter, leaking atmosphere and trailing thick black smoke on the optical feed, charging directly into the firing arc of 3 capital-class dreadnoughts. Vale scrambled back to his console, staring at the human's medical readouts in absolute horror. This was the Berserker Protocol. It wasn't a programmed military maneuver. It was a violent biological meltdown. The human brain was aggressively flooding itself with neuroaccelerants, forcibly evolving its own chemistry in real time to process complex spatial data at superhuman speeds. Kalen's synapses were firing so rapidly that the internal heat was literally cooking his cortex, temporarily altering his DNA to allow him to perceive the dreadnought's automated defense grids in extreme slow motion. The human threaded the needle. Heavy plasma turrets tracked him, but the tactical display showed his erratic, violently jerking flight path, defying every known Azurian targeting algorithm. The optical feed captured him skimming the armored hull of the lead dreadnought, deliberately stripping away his own deflectors to increase his forward velocity. He wasn't trying to survive. The telemetry confirmed he reached the exhaust port of the primary reactor shielding. He didn't drop a payload. He didn't fire standard torpedoes. He fired the emergency tow cable. The bridge's optical feed zoomed in as the thick, magnetic tether shot forward through the void, but this time, it wasn't meant to drag a friend to safety. It clamped brutally onto the dreadnought's exposed reactor housing, instantly pulling Kalen's tiny fighter into a lethal, inescapable tether. He was purposefully anchoring himself to the massive beast so the sheer kinetic force of the dreadnought's acceleration couldn't shake him loose. He didn't run. Kalen manually overrode the safety limiters on his own fusion core. The biometrics on Vale's bridge monitor flared into a solid, blinding line of white heat, spiking beyond the screen's capacity to measure, and then the feed vanished entirely into black static. The explosion was completely silent in the vacuum of space, but it hit the flagship's sensors like a physical hammer. A sphere of pure, devouring energy consumed the lead dreadnought from the inside out, rupturing its armored spine. The resulting shockwave violently destabilized the remaining two capital ships, tearing their hulls apart in a cascading chain reaction of highly volatile exotic matter. The scarlet rift lit up like a newborn star, washing the bridge of the Void Render in blinding, absolute white light. 5 days later, salvage crews pulled a freezing escape pod from the wreckage, its hull still wrapped in the scorched, fused remains of an emergency tow cable. Kalen Vance opened his eyes, his permanently evolved neural architecture processing the light in superhuman microseconds. Lyra Xerxes knelt beside the frost-covered glass, her chromatophores flushing a warm, chaotic gold that had absolutely nothing to do with duty.